These 4 expansions must be played singly. That can't be right, can it, cat? Hey guys, welcome to another Broken Meeple review, and this one is a long time coming because we thought we were going to get this in the UK around like summertime. It was previewed at the UK Games Expo, but we have only just had a retail release of this expansion, and it's about time. Oh well, better late than never, I guess. This is Cities of Splendor. This is the expansion box. Now, I have everything to do with Splendor in this box, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. This introduces 4 new modules to the game. And if you don't know what Splendor is, then seriously, where have you been living? But Splendor is a very cool, easy gateway game, a straight up dry Euro, there's no other way to put it, where you are collecting gems and buying cards in order to build up a little engine of being able to buy bigger cards later. Sounds dry, and yeah, it is a dry game, but the rules are so simple, the components are great with, nice artwork and the gem pieces, and it just, anybody can get into it. Whether you're new to gaming or a veteran gamer, there's plenty of depth, and it has been kind of begging for an expansion for some time, and well, now we got it. Is it perfect though? Is it exactly what we wanted? Well, yes and no. We'll get into that in more detail. So what happens is that there are 4 modules, and the first thing that I'm going to say that is a little bit weird is that this stipulates that they must all be played singly, i.e. you can only play each one at a time. That's annoying, very annoying, because it's not that I want to use every single module in the game when I normally do, but I like to have the option of doing that. With this, let's say you like 3 out of the 4 expansions modules, as a good guide, then that means that you have to sort of cherry pick which expansion you're going to use every time you play the game. It's like, well, I want to use that, but I really like that too. Well, which one? This one. And you may find that you won't get to use an expansion module for a good while, by the time you get to the table again. It's just a bit of a pain. But I will say that even though the game says you can't play them, put together, I would argue that some of them you could, and you could just simply house rule it. Because, well, we'll get onto more detail later, but I think that whole must be played on their own thing is an annoying factor, but one that you might actually be able to just ignore. Well, for the most part anyway, we'll see. So the first one, Cities. This one is a very simple module. It basically completely removes all those noble tiles from before, the ones where you've got sets of cards and then got free bonus points, and replaces them with these end game tiles. I believe there is 3 in every game, no matter how many players there are, and they each have a combination of sets of cards, as well as a prestige point total on it. The idea being that instead of getting the nobles, you work towards one of those tiles. And it may not necessarily mean you have to get 15 points now. You might only have to get 11, but you need a lot of variety of cards. You might actually have to get 17 prestige points, but it requires you to barely have a few cards, so you can basically get the 17 however you see fit. I like this one. It's so simple. In fact, I actually prefer to use this instead of the nobles just generally, even if I'm just teaching the base game. Because the nobles I always found were a little bit like mandatory. You almost had to get a noble before. I mean, yes, you can win it without getting a noble, but that doesn't happen very often. And if it does, then chances are some players really aren't paying attention to whoever's grabbing the big cards. So most of my wins are generally done via getting 1 or 2 nobles. And again, all you do is just collect a few sets. With this one, I like the idea that you've got variable endgame scoring as well. Like, I might work towards, say, a 15, but then as the game progresses, I'm like, oh, you know what? That 11 might actually be easier. All I've got to do is just buy a few more of those colour cards. So it allows you to cherry pick. And it's still a race because, after all, you've got to meet that criteria before an opponent does. The second one is the Orient. This is another particular favourite. This one adds a new set of cards for each of the 3 levels. They've got red coloured backs, so they're differentiated easy from the other ones. There's typically 2 types of cards in each of the various sets. And they do different things. You know, you buy them just like normal development cards, but they've each got unique abilities that differ from what you've seen before. Some of them are double gems, some of them allow as like a wild gem that you can plug onto another card. Some allow you to reserve nobles, which is quite a big deal. Some allow you to, when you buy this level 3 card, you automatically get a level 2 one for free and it can chain all the way down. There's some cool stuff you can do with these cards, and they add a nice sort of tactical element to the game. You know, you think, I really need that big card up there, there's not enough gems. Oh, but I could buy that one. That gives me 2 gold gems to use as a one-off. So if I grab that, then I can work my way to that big point scorer. You know, some very good tactical elements in there, and I almost want to throw this in with every single game. Now, one thing to note is, I mentioned it allows you to reserve a noble tile. So you'd have a bit of a problem combining this one with cities because that card would essentially become, defunct at that point. You can't say, oh, I'll reserve the city tile. That's a little bit too powerful. But reserving a noble already can cause a bit of a stir with the game, and that is not to be underestimated as a card, believe me. So there's a little bit of a clash already we can see with just those 2 modules. But if I'm playing the game and they say, right, we're either going to use cities or Orient, I'm still happy because they are my 2 favourites of the 4. Now, coming down a little bit lower on the scale, we have the 3rd one, which is the trading posts. This one essentially kind of makes the game a little bit shorter in a sense, because what it does is it gives you a board and a set of tokens each. And what happens is you have these special powers that you can earn throughout the course of the game. And when you make the criteria to get the power, which could be a certain set of cards or certain colour and a noble, that kind of thing, then you put your token on the board and it grants you a special ability for the rest of the game. Like whenever you take gems, you might be able to take 2 from pile even if you don't need to. I'm just using that as an example. But it's quite a cool one as well. You know, it gives you something else to aim for. Like, do you keep going with the cards? Or do you hang back a little bit, grab one of those powers and then try and use that to steamroll on further? And multiple people can gain these powers, so, everyone's gunning for them. You can even gain some end game points based on how many of those powers you've managed to achieve in the game. So it's a nice little addition, and I think it kind of speeds the game up a little bit. Not that Splendor was a long game to begin with, but if you imagine that you're playing essentially the same game, except now you have powers that increase your efficiency every time you get one of them, you can understand why the tempo of the game is suddenly speeded up as a result, and the game could be shorter. It's a cool one, but it's not one that I want to teach to new players. And of course, some of those powers, some people might argue some are better than others, like I say, it may make the game just a little bit too fast. But I still like it. I just prefer the cities and the Orient cards to them. But it's still a decent module. Now, my least favourite is the Strongholds. This is kind of this one actually elongates the game. And this is already a bad thing, because Splendor is great as a short gateway game. I don't want it to be any longer. And we're not saying like it adds another half hour to the game or anything, but it just feels longer. Because what happens in Strongholds is you are putting these pillar posts on the development cards. And the idea is that when you have a post on those cards, you've effectively reserved it. So it's a bit like just reserving it to get a wild gem. But if you get 3 pillars on the same card, you can basically buy it on your turn without having to spend a penny, or a gem in this case. And so everyone's thinking, right, well, I need to spend time to get his pillars off that card, but then obviously he's doing the same thing, and I want to get this card for free. So there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of sort of take that with regards to nicking the pillars on and off. It's alright, but personally I was happy enough with the reserve rule from before. You got a gem, you reserved a card, and you had to be aware that your opponent might see what you're doing and decide to reserve it out of spite. I was perfectly happy with that. With this, it's another push and pull element that just elongates the game a little bit beyond what I'm comfortable with, because obviously you're taking time to constantly deal with these pillars rather than trying to forward your own engine. So it's an okay module, but it's not one that I'm gunning for to play. In fact, it's probably one that will never get played if it's my copy of the game. I will always play with one of the other 3. But hey, 3 out of 4 ain't bad. And it's not that the Strongholds is bad, it's just not a module that I'm overly keen on. Now, earlier on I talked about this game having to be played with a single module at a time, and I was going to look at all 4 and see whether it was possible to sort of house rule it, but you're going to struggle. Because as I mentioned with the Orient, there's a card in there that allows you to reserve a noble. We obviously need the nobles in play in order to deal with that one. In the trading post, there is a power that one of the criteria requires you to have a noble. So obviously you need to have the nobles in play for that. So there is an element of some of these that can be combined. I think the Strongholds can actually be combined with any of the expansions. I don't think the Strongholds care if you have cities or the other one, so you could probably use that all the time. Bit annoying, that's my least favourite of the 4. But the cities is the one that clashes with a lot of them, because replacing the noble tiles completely suddenly means that 2 of the expansions, the Trading Post and the Orient, have things that don't work with it. Which is a shame, because I like what cities does. I just wish it maybe could have implemented it in a slightly different way. So the 2 that I would probably combine in a lot of my games would probably be the Orient and the Trading Posts. You've got the special powers, you've got the extra cards, you have a lot more options on your turn and what to do during the game. So I would argue that you could probably put those 2 together. Cities is going to clash with a lot, and Strongholds will probably gel with any of them, but I'm just not that keen on it. So I'll be interested to hear what combinations you guys have tried with this. Put it in the comments and let me know which one works for you, which modules you like better. But in terms of whether you should actually get the expansion, I still think it's worth it. Splendor on its own needs a little bit of a little bit of extra variety, a little bit of a jump up in order to make it it's already a good game, but it just needs that little bit of a pep up after all this time. So this is definitely a worthwhile expansion to get. However, notice I'm using the expansion box. The expansion box doesn't have an insert that caters for all of Splendor. Seriously, what is it with Asmodee and not doing good inserts? Yeah, everything's in bags now. Because the insert doesn't cope anymore. You cannot fit the expansion content in the original box, it does not work. And the insert for cities does not have slots for gems and things like that. So you can't combine the inserts in any way. You have to chuck one box and keep one. And the only reason that I use this one is just to remind myself that A, I have the expansion, and B, because the other Splendor box I had was getting a little bit of wear and tear, so it's like, oh well, have something a bit more new. Plus, I think Cities of Splendor sounds a little bit more of a cool title than just Splendor on its own. So, yeah, Cities of Splendor is a decent expansion to get. Not the best thing ever, that one of the modules I won't use as much, and I don't like the way that you have to play, you're almost forced to play each one on their own. That's a bit of a niggle, but otherwise I'm happy with the modules and I can recommend it. So, personal rating, probably, I would say 6 or 7. I think I would give this 7 on a personal note because it still adds some extra cool flavour to the game. I just think that the way it's being implemented is not the perfect execution. But still, like I say, if you're happy with just chucking the insert and not too bothered about how many times you have to play this game in order to try all the expansions a few times each, then, well, go for it because it's a shoo-in at that point. Certainly, if you're a big fan of Splendor, I can recommend it. I would not say it's essential, though. If you're thinking, I want to get into Splendor, should I buy Cities with it? No. Buy Splendor, play a few games of that, see if you like it, and then move on to Cities. It will still be around, it's not going to go out of print anytime soon, it's an Asmodee product, it should be fine. But I don't think that you have to get Cities when you buy Splendor. It's good, not essential. So that's it for me. That's all I can really say about this expansion. Good, not essential. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, the blog, and the podcast. And remember, it's only a game. These aren't real gems. So as much as you love playing with those poker chips, remember they're not real, okay? See you on the next Broken Meeple review. Take care, guys.